Welcome. We're continuing with Hilchos Shabbos. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Kitzur Hilchos Shabbos from Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Sif Chav Gimel. Chazara b'samoch l'kira. We're going to go back what we covered briefly yesterday a little bit. Mutter lismech k'deirosh nizbash la'itzel akira. You're allowed to put a dish that's already been cooked, meaning there's no way it's completely cooked and it's dry next to the stove, michutzola outside of the stove. Even without the conditions which normally we say you need in order to put it back. Because number one, we're not afraid that you may stoke the coals because there's no coals there, it's outside of the stove. It also does not look like you're cooking on Shabbos, which is another issue. Although you're not technically cooking because the food's already cooked, but it looks like you're cooking. When you put something next to the stove, outside of the stove, you're not concerned about that. Because it's not normal, it's not the way to cook outside of the stove.
What about in bishul?
So that's part of it, because it's already cooked. Now, it's true ein bishul achar bishul, which is a principle which tells us that there's no cooking after cooking, but we're still concerned that you shouldn't put things onto the stove because it could look like it's cooking, number one. Number two, there are cases where it's not fully cooked, but it's edible, and you're increasing it's.
According to normal.
Huh?
If you can put it back. According to normal.
It depends on what circumstance. One of the things, it has to be warm.
No.
But where could you put it on a stove? No. You could put if you had a mind, maybe you took it off. If you kept your hand on it, if it's the same dish, that have to be met. You can't put anything that's hot back on the fire automatically. No, even the cases that I make, even you're allowed to put it back within certain conditions. Okay. Let's look at footnote 51. It's not the way to cook outside of a stove. The Sham Hesef in Shulchan Aruch, he adds, in a case where the fire is not covered, meaning for whatever reason you have a stove that's on Shabbos, you can't put it on the counter next to that stove. There's no blech. In a case where you don't really need the food so much, you should be concerned and don't put it there because there's no blech on it. And he points out that you should learn the halach as well. Look further in things next to the oven in the in various forms. The blech that we put these days on top of the fire, we could question this is a great example where Shulchan Aruch says one thing, you have to understand what it's saying. The blech that we have today, it's a question if it's considered samach la'ish, because imagine you have a stove, you have a blech on top of that stove, not an electric blech, a cover on top of the whatever fire it is. On the side of it, you're putting food. That side is open to the fire. It's not really covered. So who knows, is it considered samach la'ish, or maybe it's al gabe ha'ish? It's literally like you're putting it on the fire. There's nothing in between it.
Unless it's covered completely.
Yeah. But in a typical old blech scenario,
Right, the electric.
which is still very common, the electric is fully covered, fully closed. Next, it shouldn't be an issue at all. But again, once you say next to a blech, you have to be careful what type of blech it is. Those that say that it is allowed to put cooked food next to a blech on Shabbos is because they consider the blech next to the fire. If you say that you're allowed to do that, you can't put it really close to it because then you're being machzir from smicha al gaba. Point is, you have to really be careful. What's the scenario of your blech? Putting something next to the fire is not so simple. It's doable, but you have to be careful how it's done. But those that consider the whole blech as if it's on the fire itself, regardless if the fire is right under it or not, if you put the pot there from Erev Shabbos in a spot of the blech where Yatzel, which means it's about 109 degrees Fahrenheit. 109. What?
190.
No, 109, like point something. Then you can put it next to the potato if it's not really close to it. Okay. Now, if it's not very, very hot, for whatever reason, let's say you have a blech on your stove, there's one burner on, the burner is on very low, so it's not so hot in the first place, and the whole blech, the rest of the blech is big, and it's not this way, it's somewhat warm. I'm going to put something next to it, that's not a problem. Which takes us to the next concept, which we just mentioned, putting something next to or onto something which is not so hot. Yatzel is a term or a measurement which tells you that it's hot enough that the finger or hand of a child would get scalded, would get burnt from that heat, which is about 109 degrees. But if it's a situation where it's not that hot, the Yatzel display, you can put it back. Even without the conditions which allow you to put back the dish. Because if it's not that hot, it doesn't look like you are cooking in the chatchila. The main issue here is it looks like you're cooking. Okay, it's not on the fire. It's covered, so you're not afraid that you're going to stoke it. It's already cooked. The problem is it looks like it's cooking. So if the temperature of this blech is not yatzel this way, no chash, it looks like it's cooking. Even though you don't know how hot it is when you look at it. But the fact is, this is not the way that you cook. It points out in 53 that this is all putting it next to on the oven, but not into the oven, into the stove. What about putting it on top of the stove itself? There's an interesting scenario. You wake up in the morning. Huh? Yeah, on top of a pot. Is that stove? Thank you. Putting it on top of a pot. A person wakes up in the morning. He notices that on the stove he has a pot of cholent. This cholent is burnt. Now this is a situation where there are ways to do it without a blech. He did it in one of those ways. Now he's concerned it may get burnt even more. It's already burnt, which means that cooking it more is going to ruin the food. You're also afraid that it's not making it virale. You're also afraid that it's going to get even worse. It'll be completely inedible. So what you could do is yochel l'hosir me'akira. You could take the pot off the stove. You can put an empty pot on the stove, al pi akira, on top of the stove. Now you can put the burnt cholent, that original pot, onto this pot that you put on top of the stove. Because this pot, the empty pot, is covering over the stove. It's covering over the stove with the dishes inside. This is not something which you do practically. And what I mean is as follows. This whole halacha is, if you had a stove which does not have a blech on it, there are certain scenarios, which again, we're machmir, we don't do it, but there are certain scenarios where you could put up a dish on top of it. Let's say there was meat inside that was not cooked at all, and it was enough time, it was ready for Shabbos, so it didn't start to cook. Again, it's complicated to do it, but if a person did it, so now he has an open fire with a pot on top. Shabbos morning, he sees it's all burnt. He wants it to be hot for the suda, for the meal. He doesn't want it to be fully burnt. What should he do? You can't lower the fire. So you take an empty pot, and you put it there. You lift up the first pot, you put it on top. So now it's like it's covered, and it's fine. It'll be less heat. It'll stay warm. It's not going to burn anymore. He has a discussion here in the footnote. How are you allowed to put metal on a fire? You're burning. You can't make coals on Shabbos. So Isser. So he says that it's not a problem because it's not going to become coals. In other words, if it was such a hot fire and it was that long, if it was the material that you're afraid it could turn into a coal, it would be a problem. A metal pot that's empty, there's no food inside, you put it on, you're allowed to. Again, this, even believe it.
No, it will make it like a goof.
Yeah, it will cause it to be considered as if it's covered up. Chavav. You can also put a tavshil. So you have something, a dish, and you have a pot already on the blech, and you want to put this dish on top of that pot. Let's say you have a tea kettle on the stove. It's hot, and you want to put something on it that it should warm up. You're allowed to do it. Even though it's hot enough that yatsi ledas bay, which means 109 degrees or so. We're not concerned that hey, there's no blech because the pot that's in between is considered to be that.
Even if it's not dry, it's still you can still put it.
He says here, he goes back to it and he says it has to be dry. Because when there's liquid, it's a little bit like cooking, even though it was already cooked. When there's liquid, it's like cooking. Yes, and he says also that even if it's a vushal called tzarkei, but you enjoy or you want it to be well done, it's tamek v'yafalei is also a problem. It's dry and it's completely cooked, and there's a blech also. This is talking about a blech, and there's a blech you can put it on top. You can put it back in this case when there's no isra bishul. Even without the conditions which allow you to put it back, which we said you have to have it in mind and you have to hold it. And we had a bunch of conditions when you're allowed to put something back on the stove. In a case where you're putting it on top of a pot that's on the stove, it doesn't look like cooking. It's not how you cook. You put it on the fire or at best on a blech, but you don't put stuff on top of a pot if you want to cook it. So therefore, it's okay. Yeah. Again, we're careful.
I don't understand about the tumor, when you put, another pot down. I mean, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so there's a gzeira.
There is no.
It's a good idea to recap. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbos.
Yeah.
What if the food's already cooked? I'm not cooking. I'm just keeping it hot. Mm-hmm. Technically, that wouldn't be a problem. We're concerned that I'm going to be afraid that my food is not fully cooked, so I'm going to increase the fire. Right? So therefore, we said you have to either cover over the coals or move them away completely. So I'm not going to be, by mistake, I'm not going to go and fan the flames.
Okay.
So that has to be there. Now we're talking about you want to put something back on the fire. It's Shabbos.
Yeah.
It's cooked already. It's hot. You want to put it back on because you want to keep it warm. You took out a little bit, you want to put it back. When could you do it? In certain cases, in many cases, it's a problem because it's either you didn't have it in mind, you took it off, or it cooled off a little bit. So he's saying if you put something on top of a pot, so it's not directly on the fire or even on the blech, it doesn't look like cooking. And for sure, you're not going to go stoke the coals.
Yeah, but
So you put one pot inside the other.
No, on top of it. That was a separate thing about putting it in a pot to create a blech. But Shabbos morning, you have something that's dry, a dry kugel. You want to warm it up, you can put it on top of a pot that's on the fire. Because that pot has a warmth, some level of heat. Okay, here's another very important thing. Blechs, and we're into a rhythm or a routine of what we do before Shabbos. You put it on a blech, that's fine. It's very important that putting something back at Erev Shabbos, we have to remember that it has to be cooked already. You can't put raw food unless it's either it could be eaten raw or it's like meat, which you're going to completely disregard it. Right. You don't care about it because but normally it has to be cooked, edible, whether it's half or a third, but it has to be somewhat edible.
What you don't kill? What you don't kill?
If you take meat, for example, I'm not going to try to increase the fire or do anything to it today because I don't want to eat it tonight. There's no way that it'll get ready, even if I increase the fire a little bit, because it takes a long time for it to cook. It's some kind of roast. It takes hours. Tomorrow morning it'll be okay. But typical food that you have to make sure that it's cooked before you put it on. Now, till now we spoke about putting something back on the fire on Shabbos. What about putting it back on the fire before Shabbos? All of these returning scenarios is when you do it on Shabbos. It's Friday afternoon. It's not Shkia yet. Your kids wanted to eat, so you took off some food from the fire, from the blech, and from the stove, and you gave it to them. Now, you decide you want to put it back on the stove right before Shabbos. You could put it in even inside the kira, even without the conditions which are normally required. Okay, as long as it's been cooked, at least better, at least half. But otherwise, you can't just stick it back in because you have the same problem as before Shabbos, and you may, do stuff with the food, with the fire. However, if it's really close to Shkia, your pot is very cold, and you don't have enough time for this dish to warm up before Shabbos, to boil before Shabbos. If you don't really need it, if you have another way without it, better don't put it in there. Treat it the way you would do on Shabbos itself. That it still has to be warm. You had it in mind. Don't put things 2 minutes before Shkia into the stove if it's not going to have enough time to boil. There's another gzeira. If I'm going to do this right before Shkia, I may start doing it on Shabbos itself, right? In many homes, little kids are eating right before Shkia or right before Shabbos or by Lichman's time. You're going to get into the habit putting in cold food without enough time for it to cook. You have to be careful. Therefore, somebody that wants to put a pot, even though now it's boiling, but he wants to put it on a stove without a blech, don't put it right next to Shkia. Because if it was cold, you wouldn't be able to put it there. You can't put it there while it's still day. Stop for maidiv.
Meaning you need to do it
with a blech.
in advance time.
Enough time, yeah. So stop here for maidiv. Use a blech.
Who's using